Welcome to Stronger Schools.
Welcome. I'm Matt Miller, Director of Education Leadership at Finalsite. I am honored and delighted to welcome Erik Gundersen from Suffern Central District School District in New York to our podcast. Erik, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, and I'm honored to be your first guest.
I know. I can't believe it, and I'm glad you're here. Can you tell our audience a little bit about Suffern, where you're at, and then we'll kind of go from there?
Sure. So the Suffern Central School District is a wonderful place to be a student, to be an educator, and to live. We are in the lower Hudson Valley, probably about, depending upon where you're going in New York City, about 40 minutes outside of the city. It's a suburban environment, but it's changing a lot as well, as so many communities around the country are.
I had the honor of coming and visiting with Erik at Suffern a few months ago, and being brutally honest, Erik is underselling how great of a place it is, in my opinion. It sits up on a hill. It's amazing to look at, and you have a great rapport with your staff and your kids from what I could see when we were there for that day. Tell me a little bit about, and tell the audience a little bit about the student body, the makeup a little bit, but how it's a different environment and feel from most schools I've been to. I think you know what I mean in terms of, giving kids autonomy, making choices and things like that. Can you jump into that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So first of all, I believe strongly that in order to thrive as an educational leader, you have to have fun with what you're doing, right? So you have to be able to know some students, really get to know teachers, and really become a part of the community, even if you don't live specifically in the school district. So yeah, I don't mean to undersell the Suffern Central School District. As you know me, Matt, I'm not a very boastful person, so I don't brag a lot.
Right.
But I'll be the first person to say Suffern Central is a wonderful school. And we continue to look at what we're doing to strive to do better. So our community is made up of about 4,000 students. And we also have within our community an additional 1,700 students who take advantage of religious schools, predominantly Hasidic or Orthodox Jewish families that have been moving into the district for quite some, probably about the past decade or more. And more folks that are choosing those religious schools are moving into the district. So it is a very interesting and changing dynamic here in the district, where about 10 years ago, we had about 5,000 students, public school students. Now we have 4,000 public school students, and a growing number of students who take advantage of yeshivas.
Awesome. Nice. Thank you so much for sharing that point. Can you talk, Erik, so we can learn a little bit more about you, sort of like your education career path and what brought you to Suffern and the steps that led up to that?
Yeah, so I've been doing this, oh my gosh, for probably about 29 years. I started off as a physics teacher. I came right out of the University of Delaware, became a physics teacher, loved teaching physics, became involved in our teachers union, and really enjoyed that as well. I was in the Pascack Valley Regional High School District in New Jersey for 27 years before taking the jump across the state line and coming over here to Suffern Central. But my career path is a little bit different. As I said, I started off as a teacher, never wanted to get into administration, but a superintendent by the name of Ben Tantillo came to Pascack Valley, and he inspired me. He was the first person where I recognized, like, you can have a superintendent who can really be a change maker, be focused on kids, and really be innovative to improve educational outcomes for kids. So I started my career path then into administration very much because of his inspiration. So I became a supervisor of our science department. I became the director of curriculum for the district, and then spent 11 years as superintendent in that district. All 27 years in the same place, but it was great. And then I recognized that it was time to make a change and see if I could do this thing in a K through 12 school district. Pascack was only 2 high schools. Small school district, very innovative. We had a lot of freedom to do things that were really exciting, but I decided to make a big jump over here to Suffern Central, and I don't regret it for a moment.
Awesome. That's I love hearing that story. And It has to be hard. Wasn't it hard to go from a place that you were at for, literally a couple decades plus into a new environment? Was that hard, or was that, I know you welcome that change, but tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was more exciting than hard. So I made the change. And of course, when you leave a place after so many years, you miss the people, you miss the connections. I took great pride in knowing every teacher in the district, really understanding what was going on with people's families, and making the jump to a district that was twice as large. I still very much want to have those connections. And that's a tough thing to do when you have a district of 4,000 students compared to 2 schools and 2,000 students. But I found it to be exciting, and the Suffern Central community was very welcoming. We have a great administrative team here, and the district had experienced a couple of years of difficulty with some board dynamics, with some leadership changes. So I felt as though they were welcoming that consistency in leadership that they were hoping I'd provide. And so far, so good. We've been making some great connections and having a great time, albeit making some very difficult decisions as well.
Well, let's jump into that just a little bit. And I know you and I have shared this before we started talking today, but it's interesting going from one place to another, especially when changes happen shortly thereafter. So why don't you tell your audience a little bit about that situation, what you've been sort of championing at Suffern, and what the next steps are?
Yeah. So, obviously, Matt, you and I know that we go back some time, right? And I know that, you've gone through some challenges like this as well. So as a school leader, it's important to reach out to colleagues who can provide you with some support, some mentorship, some guidance. So you've been a big part of that for me. But the challenge that we faced here in Suffern Central, as I mentioned, we have a growing population of folks who, for religious purposes, are taking advantage of religious schools. And over the last 10 years, we've seen a 25% decline in elementary school enrollment. We right now have 5 elementary schools, all neighborhood schools, that have dwindling populations. And so we had to make a very difficult decision to consolidate our elementary schools from 5 to 4. But we decided not just simply to close the school and shift students to neighboring schools, but we've decided to essentially reimagine what the elementary school experience looks like for students here in Suffern Central. So we've created a modified Princeton plan for our students. So out of the 4 remaining schools, 2 of them will be pre-K through 2 buildings. And then all the students in those respective pre-K through 2 buildings will go to sister schools of 3 through 5 buildings. So we'll have 4 buildings, but we'll be able to have larger grade class sizes. We'll be able to have a more robust extracurricular opportunities for students in grades 3 through 5. We'll have more consistency of programming, all the things that we as educational leaders know we benefit from by having a larger class size in those buildings.
I mean, from an outsider's perspective, that makes a lot of sense. And so when you're tasked with something like that, that's a huge undertaking. What's probably been the hardest thing about the change for the community?
Yeah. So if you talk to most folks in the community, I get comments from people saying, this has been a long time coming. We're glad that the district is making this change. We're glad that we're doing something better for our elementary school students, as opposed to just shutting down a building and shifting students into the same model, but in fewer schools. But I have to tell you, there's no doubt about it that the hardest thing is when you have to tell teachers, students, and parents of the school that's shutting down that it's their school that's shutting down. And that's, if you didn't have parents and students and teachers who were more emotional about it, there'd be something wrong, right? Like it shows that they have great pride in their local neighborhood school. And that's the toughest thing.
I reflect back on my career and things that I've done, and I had a similar situation with that. And I'm not inserting myself in this part of what you're dealing with, other than the fact of, I think that when we were first starting out as education leaders and first in the superintendency, I think the conventional wisdom collectively was, don't make any big changes or anything different until after your first year. That's sort of like what the veteran guard told us growing up, like in ed leadership, when we didn't know anything about what we were doing. and trying to get our legs underneath us, as it were. And so I broke that rule in my first year in one of my districts where I had to make a change similar to yours. And I did it after winter break. So I was like, the new mantra was, don't make any big changes until after winter break. You know where I'm going. Don't make any changes until after winter break. And so get your first 6 months in. And then now you're shattering that conventional wisdom again by making this change just a few months into this school year.
Yeah. So, it's, I actually do have the luxury, Matt, like you had to make that change faster. And sometimes as leaders, you come into a situation, you have to make a decision quickly. I did have the luxury here. This is now my third year in Suffern Central.
Right.
So, I know that you're a huge communications person, all about building culture. I know that you've had in the past, a real significant presence on social media in branding a school. So I really looked to a lot of what you had done with regards to what you did in your last two school districts, and then tried to incorporate that here into Suffern Central. So my first year was spent building community, right? Getting out to see kids, see parents. We had the Suffern Scoop video series where I'd be highlighting really some of the fun and cool things going on in the district. The second year, we set up the hashtag One Suffern. It was all about the community coming together as one Suffern. 7 schools, one Suffern, recognizing that a change was going to be happening. And so we continue to harp on that concept of, hey, we may have 5 elementary schools that are changed into 4, but together we are one Suffern. And a lot of that came from you with your hashtags that you would continually push out, right? Just to build that sense of community and get people to recognize that even if there's a tough decision coming down that might negatively impact you and your family's status quo,
right?
We're doing it for the entire community's benefit.
Yeah, and I think it really helps too that you had spent some time there. You do, because it's a continual process of that community trust aspect. And so just by what you just shared, you have done that in terms of one Suffern and 7 schools, but you're all going to the same place. I think too, when you have to close a building, that's a very emotional thing for people to go through, whether it's staff members, certainly you, but also students and families when that's their school, that's maybe where they went to. And so it can be hard from that standpoint. But I think in time, it's one of those things that, yeah, it was really hard, but it makes sense, right? I mean,
absolutely.
I know you're in the middle of it or probably in the beginning of it, so to speak. But I think that in time, it certainly right sets itself, so to speak. And I think that'll certainly help. So the other thing too, I think, is when you couched it, and you've done a great job, because I follow the things that you're doing, you've done a great job of, we're all funneling into one high school, right? Essentially. So it's not like maybe closing a high school would probably be harder in some respects, and not all respects, but in some respects that would be harder to close a high school. But if you're closing a place early on in a student's career, they're all collectively still moving on to the same places, have the same opportunities, same 4 walls type of thing. So I think that can be a sort of a softener, as it were, to the kind of ripping that Band-Aid off. So,
you know what, Matt, this is one of those great points, which is why I always like talking with you. I'm going to jot that one down because that's a really good point that I haven't been harping on as much, about the fact that, all these students are going to be coming together in the middle school and then our high school as well.
As we are in education, just steal it and use it as your own, because someplace too. So I'm glad that you did that. So I think this is a good point in the podcast to talk a little bit about your communication style. So it's hard to talk about yourself, and like you said it early on, you are not a boastful person, and I will back that up 110% with that. I mean, there are people in that education space that, they're all over the spectrum on that. You are one of those people that do not toot your own horn. And so if I can do that on your behalf, I'm going to, whether you like it or not. But you talked a little bit about your communication style, if you had to sort of tell somebody what it was.
Yeah. So I like people, right? And that's not unique to educational leaders. out there. I like people. I like building relationships. I get frustrated when I can't get to know as many people as I'd like to quickly enough. So I like being out and being present in schools, at after school events, athletic events for kids, popping on, what used to be Twitter. And now we're focusing more on Instagram because that's where kids are, about things that they're doing. Our district communications team, I can't say enough about the importance of having a director of communications and community outreach, somebody who is helping the superintendent be focused on messaging, and not just one directional messaging, hearing back from the community as well. So our communications director is phenomenal and puts out, whether it's, the work that we do on social media, direct email communication, mass communication to our families, or as I referenced before, our monthly video series, the Suffern Scoop, like a fun, energetic, super focused on kids and what we're doing, just to build that sense of community that we believe strongly in as one Suffern.
When I see your monthly videos, I'm always smiling by the end because I can tell how much you like it and how genuine it is. But I like you amplifying what your district is doing, what your kids are doing, and what your teachers are doing.
I feel like even in tough times, right? If you can focus on the positives, that just gets people to focus on, oh yeah, there might be this controversial topic that we're talking about as adults, but look at the awesome things that kids are doing, no matter what the adults are talking about. It's cool.
Yeah, that's well said, my friend. Well said. You mentioned your communications team a little bit. No wrong answer to this. Are they part of your executive team?
Yeah, absolutely. Our Monday morning meetings, that person is always there, and I probably meet sometimes more with the communications director than some of the other administrators, just because it's always important to be in sync with one another. And let's face it, your communications person is one of your closest advisors because they really have a finger on the pulse of what's happening in the community.
Any chance, do they live in your community? Do they live in Suffern, your communication team?
Yeah, and let me give a shout out. Her name's Jenny Mermelstein. She's phenomenal. And yeah, she lives in the community and has students, has children that go to the schools, right? So is totally.
Yeah. I think that says a lot when a couple things. A, the communications person is part of your team, and B, they're part of the community. And I'm not saying that they have to or whatever, but I think it adds another lens to the conversation and the messaging when a member that close of a member of your team is living in the community and also has kids there. And so that won't always be the case. And it doesn't mean it's not good in places where it's not like that. It just means that it just adds that you can just sense it a little bit, I think.
Absolutely. And in my prior district, the communications director there as well lived in the community, had kids that went through the school. It's incredibly valuable. But you're right. That doesn't have to be the end all and be all criteria for having a director of communications, but having somebody who really sees the big strategic picture of the district, but also recognizes that not everyone is or should be paying attention to the strategic vision of the district and get caught up sometimes in the minutia. And so that communications director can help a superintendent bridge that gap to remind people about why we're doing something, why it's important, and just be on message.
Yeah, well said. Well said. All right, let's shift a little bit. You are also, and I did not prep you for this one, you are also a published author.
Yeah. Yeah.
A different space than I think most ed leaders tend to be now. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, very different space. It actually keeps me grounded to what I started off my career as doing. And I have, way back when I first started teaching, I published the Handy Physics Answer Book. I might have it around. It doesn't matter. It's not on the market anymore. You can find it wrinkled up on used book websites maybe. And then also we're actually working on our next edition of it's more of a technical college physics textbook. It's called Applied Physics. And I have two other co-authors, and I've been doing this now for, probably 15 years, come out with 4 different editions. But it's a textbook, right? And an e-textbook and all that kind of stuff. But it's fun because it brings me back to my high school physics teaching roots. And it's a good time.
Yeah, back in the college days, if I could have got a hold of and wring the neck of the guy that was the author of my science textbook, I surely would have glad to have
I can venture because I know how old you are. I know it definitely wasn't me, but yeah, I'm sure there are kids out there that are going, "What the heck was this guy talking about in this book?"
We are so old that when we went to college, the professor that we had for class was the guy that wrote the book that we had to buy for $200 at the bookstore. So
that's right.
Didn't have all the other things that the kids have now. But anyway, I digress. What year is this for you as a superintendent?
13.
What would...
14. Yeah.
All right. 14.
But I think that's a good thing, right? That you don't count, because if you were counting, you're too focused on, how many more years left do I have? And it's just, I've been doing this for a little while, but I have to tell you, Matt, and I couldn't be happier than being a superintendent. It's hard work.
It is.
I miss aspects of the classroom, and I know that you did as well. But I love the big picture visioning and working with the community and still getting to know kids.
What piece of advice would 14 years of experience, Dr. Gundersen, say to first-year Superintendent Erik Gundersen about the job and about the position?
Remind yourself about why you're doing this every day, and it always comes down to kids. And if you're having a tough time, go visit a school where there's some kids. And being a superintendent from a high school district, one of the things I love about being a K through 12 superintendent is I can go see little kids. And how cool is that? Because they're not paying attention to all the craziness out there. They just love it when somebody walks into the room, and it helps ground you and recognize your purpose. And then go to the high school and have a more intellectual conversation with some, adolescent kids. But that's the fun part. So don't lose sight of why you got into the business.
I love that. That is perfect advice. What about, is that the same advice you give to those that are seeking a superintendency? Anything different in terms of that? Or do you think it pretty much matches what you just said?
No, I think it definitely matches what was just said. And anybody who's looking to become a superintendent, just connect with your superintendent. Show them that you are committed to learning and growing, because as you know, Matt, the aspiring superintendent who approaches you and pretends to know everything, you and I are the first ones to admit that we know a little bit, but we were learning every single day. The job gets harder every year. There's no doubt about it. People that think like, oh, in your 14th year as a superintendent should be easier. No, this is tough stuff, but you gotta love it.
You do have to love it. It is tough stuff, and the target gets bigger and bigger just because every time you have to make a decision that sometimes people aren't happy with, and that's other things you have to deal with. But you have navigated that really, really well, and just again, the vibe I've got from the people in Suffern and the people that work for you, with you. I know you would correct me on that, so I did it myself. But the people that work with you see that, and you live and breathe it, so you're not just saying it. So I really, really appreciate that piece. You touched a little bit on that last couple minutes about sort of like leadership networks. And so talk a little bit about the power of, not so much the collaborative per se, but just the networks that you've been able to be a part of in your career as a superintendent. Yeah.
So Matt, you and I both know the first network that comes to probably collectively both of mine is the League of Innovative Schools that was developed by Digital Promise. Really a phenomenal network. It's where you and I first met and have continued to get to know one another along with other superintendent colleagues, learn from other superintendents in school districts throughout the entire country. There's nothing better than getting out of your county and out of your state to see how other districts are approaching things. And yeah, there are some other networks as well. And one of the ones that you've created now, the Superintendent Collaborative, it just reminds me of how exciting it is to get together with people that are looking to learn and grow from one another. And it's just such an organic, enjoyable movement to be a part of. So I appreciate everything that you're doing on that front, Matt. And I know that the others that are involved in that network are as well.
That wasn't a shameless plug, but I appreciate you saying.
No, I plugged it for you. Matt. It's deserved.
Nah, but I really, and I appreciate that. I really do. I don't want to say that, but I do think it speaks to the relationships that superintendents need to have with one another, because when you're one of one, sometimes things get a little sideways, or sometimes you need somebody to bounce advice off of. And let's face it, and I'm not speaking directly to you when I say this, but sometimes people that work with you or for you, depending on your circumstance or where you're at, say what they think you want to hear, versus being sort of that honest truth teller saying, yes, but have you thought of whatever, or, like a pushback. So like when I had things, I would call you, I'd call some of my other superintendent colleagues, and it was rarely the superintendent next door. It was somebody that I had a connection with that I could call and say, I'm dealing with this. Got any advice for me? Things like that,
Yep. You got that right. That whether it's a fellow superintendent friend, a colleague, or, some superintendents, myself included, I have a coach. Been doing this job for now 14 years, and I have a coach, and that is just such an incredibly good thing that I have, that I can reach out to somebody whose role it is to challenge me and to figure out how I can get better and figure out the gaps that I have. It's great.
It is. It's really good to have those people, those coaches, whether in executive world or just like a life coach. That's that kind of butts up against, so to speak, sort of that mental health aspect that I think all of us need in terms of supports. And so that's good. I'm glad that you have that, and you have that going for you, with you. So, all right, let's delve into non-educational, non-superintendent, learning a little bit more about Erik question. All right.
Oh man. Okay.
All right, my friend. First record album you ever bought with your own money?
All right. So Matt, I'm not quite as old as you. So my first album was not a record album. It was a cassette tape, 2 cassette tapes.
Same here, but okay, fair enough. Go ahead. 2.
I remember going up to Bookends in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and going down into the basement where they had those old-fashioned records that you used to buy. But I bought the high-tech cassette tapes, and it was Police Synchronicity and Men at Work. Down Under. Men at Work, Down Under. Yeah.
So Synchronicity, was it 2, or is it Synchronicity? Yeah. I remember.
Good job, Matt. Synchronicity 2. Put it in my Walkman. It wasn't a Sony Walkman because I didn't have that kind of cash, but I had a Walkman, right, with the fuzzy headphones, and yeah, loved it.
I love it. That's good. That's really good. Then first concert you ever went to, not like, chamber event or whatever, but where you bought a ticket, or someone, you could have gone with a parent too, or sibling, whatever.
Yep.
But
so I'll never forget it. So it was 1986. I was in 8th grade. And you know me, Matt, I'm very proud of my Norwegian heritage, right? I spent my childhood going to Norway a lot. And so in 1986, Aha was like the big band in the world at that time. And my parents were so excited that this Norwegian band, Aha, was coming to Radio City Music Hall to play. So they got the 4 of us tickets, my sister and I, my parents. We went to like the upper mezzanine. We saw the concert. It was great. It was the first real concert that my parents had been to as well. We were having a great time. The end of the concert comes and my parents are like, well, that's terrible. And then we started to leave because the reason why it was terrible is my parents, and I didn't know because it was my first concert, we didn't realize that there was such a thing called an encore. And they hadn't played Take On Me. So we started to leave. And then all of a sudden they came back out and they started playing Take On Me. And it was a peak of life. It was awesome. Yeah. My wife, Amy, and I, we go to concerts a whole bunch, as you know. And so, we never leave until the end of the encore. Sometimes the second encore pops up, right? You never know exactly when it's going to end until the lights turn on. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great story. I'd never heard that one before. If I did, I don't remember, but I think I remember that one. And the whole encore piece was, that's really cool. No, I appreciate that.
What was your first concert, Matt?
First concert was John Denver, but I was like in 2nd grade. So.
Oh, wow. You were musically more advanced than I am. 2nd grade.
And there's a picture floating around. I was lucky enough to get a picture with John Denver after the show, believe it or not. There's a picture floating around, John Denver, little Matt, 6 years old.
And that's why you have pictures of Bruce Springsteen in your stuff all over the place. You guys look like buddies, for crying out loud.
Yeah, right. We try to keep that on the down low. Anyway, my friend, anything else you want to wrap up with? I appreciate your time. We're butting up on a half an hour. But any last words of wisdom for our audience and for the work that you do?
It probably goes without saying, right? But like you've harped on it, you've mentioned it before, the importance of a network, right? So don't forget about not only your professional network, but your personal network as well. Your friends, your family, those closest to you, my wife, Amy, my kids, Brent and Chase. Keeping that balance and making sure they're at the center of everything that you do, and don't lose sight of your family life and making yourself happy is the key to being happy in your profession as well.
Well said. That's a great way to end. Erik, thank you so much, and have a good day, my friend.
Thanks a lot, Matt. See you soon.